It is my extreme pleasure to welcome everyone here today to this very esteemed and necessary forum and to the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. I should be saying though, welcome once again, since we in the Department of History have been fortunate enough to have had a sustained relationship with the spiritual Shouter Baptist community. Both members of the spiritual Shouter Baptist community and for the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. It highlights an event in our local history, the passing of the Shouter Prohibition Ordinance of 1917, which stands tall as a reminder of the tumultuous experiences that have gone into the shaping of the spiritual Shouter Baptist community and into shaping who we are as a people today. Though specific to the spiritual Shouter Baptist community, this event, with its direct implication of suppression, discrimination, injustice, and inequity, resonates deeply throughout the Caribbean. The discipline of history revolves around the telling or narrating of stories. History or his story, her story, your story, our story. It is clear that the theme of the discussion today, examining the Shouter Baptist Prohibition Ordinance through the lens of your story or ours, is in absolute congruence with our focus and objectives as historians. To tell not just the global, more popular histories, but to tell the new stories, the stories of those who have been sidelined and discriminated against, and to bring new perspectives to all stories. This in itself makes today's symposium a truly exciting one for us historians. To the esteemed members of the spiritual Shouter Baptist community, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for choosing us, the Department of History, to share in this imperative forum. We are very honored. Thank you for recognizing and reaffirming the need for us as a people to also engage the discordant dimensions of our past, as opposed to mindfully disregarding it. I call upon all our students present here today to use this forum as an example of how our history should be engaged, objectively, but fearlessly and passionately. I know that we will all leave here today more enlightened and appreciative of the people and events that have contributed to the shaping of the spiritual Shouter Baptist community into a resilient, proud, and strong community, one that continues to function as a foundational pillar of our multicultural landscape. Once again, a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you.
We are here today for the symposium, Conversation, Your Story or Ours. And just to set the parameters in terms of why we are here today, because we have dubbed this month Shouter Freedom Month, because we started last year in November to celebrate the centenary commemoration year. And the National Congress of Incorporated Baptist Organizations of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the National Evangelical Spiritual Baptist Faith, known as NESBF, came together along with other organizations in the faith and agreed that we would establish a joint committee, the Spiritual Baptist Shouter Prohibition Ordinance Centenary Commemoration Committee, to celebrate the passing of the 100th anniversary of the passing of the Shouters Prohibition Ordinance in 1970. And I say celebrate, and I know that that poses a problem for some people. Actually, we are commemorating the passing of the ordinance,
The Red Edge Mall at the corner Mooneyram Street and Western Main Road, St. James, where parking is available for our valued customers on both sides of the street. Red Edge Mall caters for the health conscious, the tastiest soups you'll ever find, the freshest produce, trendy clothing for the fashion dons and divas. Experience the most exotic African male and female outfits, costume jewelry of all descriptions. If you're one who pays special attention to your hair, welcome to the home of hair. Get the latest and widest variety of phones of all descriptions and repairs on the spot at the Red Edge Mall. Closing time 9 p.m. The Red Edge Mall, making shopping affordable. Powered by the Black Caucus Movement.
The Black Caucus Movement, we're making a statement. The Black Caucus Movement, making a statement. Yeah.
Hi, this is a century of the African man, the 21st century, and I'm the greatest herbalist.
We treat all ailments and diseases from HIV/AIDS right down to herpes zoster.
If you are suffering from any pain or any disease within the body, you can check Trevor Sears.
This here is the herbal jar. It's very powerful for treating all kinds of diseases. It cleans out waste and bacteria. It removes all waste, toxins, poisons from the body. It also have a naturalized herbs, the immune builders. It strengthens sinews in the body, bones, muscles, joints.
Also, we deal with land problems. Those of you who have land to sell, those of you who have house to sell, and those of you who want to get any advice in doing business, also investing, I will show you how to double your money. You get 50% on the return of your dollar. I'm the Minister of Natural Herbs and Healing and also the President of the Caribbean. The future of herbal medication is in good hands.
This is my daughter, and I started cooking with Candice from in the Savannah, Queen's Park, Savannah.
Hi, my name is Candice Tuppen. I'm the owner of Panties Pure Food Delight. We are located at 46 to 48 Duke Street, Port of Spain, inside Massey Trinidad All Stars Panyard. And we cater for exclusively Creole food at a reasonable price in Port of Spain. And we been in existence since I'm a little child. But we came to town about 8 years ago, and we have established here, and every day we cook something different. On a Tuesday we do like peas rice with callaloo, or peas like stew peas, pigeon peas, lentil peas, black eyed peas. We would do like stew pork, stew chicken, and on a Wednesdays like pigtail rice. You could cook it with bhaji or split peas, okra rice, and on Thursdays curry, and on a Friday is like a Sunday dish. On a Saturday is soup, oxtail soup, nice oxtail soup. The Black Caucus is a movement for everybody. It's for everybody, everyone. If you are interested in getting forms, you can also get forms at Trinidad All Stars at Tanti's Pure Food Delight. And if you have $100 and you want to spend that $100 on something profitable, don't spend it on beers, don't spend it on alcohol, don't spend it on cigarettes. Put it to something meaningful towards the movement, towards the Black Caucus movement. You wouldn't go wrong.
This community is ours.
This community is ours.
This community is ours. This community is ours.
This community is ours.
The Red Edge Mall at the corner Mooneyram Street and Western Main Road, St. James, where parking is available for our valued customers on both sides of the street. Red Edge Mall caters for the health conscious, the tastiest soups you'll ever find, the freshest produce, trendy clothing for the fashion dons and divas. Experience the most exotic African male and female outfits, costume jewelry of all descriptions. If you're one who pays special attention to your hair, welcome to the home of hair. Get the latest and widest variety of phones of all descriptions and repairs on the spot at the Red Edge Mall. Closing time 9 p.m. The Red Edge Mall, making shopping affordable. Powered by the Black Caucus Movement.
The Black Caucus Movement, we're making a statement. The Black Caucus Movement, making a statement. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Greatly appreciate the way in which those students and BAUTT brought alive that presentation, that book made by Earl Lovelace, Wine of Astonishment. As a student at the UWI, I read The Dragon Can't Dance by Earl Lovelace. I didn't realize that he had such spiritual depth in this other production here of The Wine of Astonishment. So I need to put that on my list of books to read. Let's hear it one more time for the students of UWI. We are continuing the discussion now in a different forum. The students did their bit. Now we will have our first panel presentation entitled Historical Repression, Social Impression, Cultural Impact, Baptist and Beyond. We have three presenters in this first panel. They are L. Anthony Watkins, Kafra Kamban, Dr. Earl Lovelace.
Allow me to, first of all, thank the organizers for challenging me with this particular theme, because it really took me to a place that I had not visited for a while. And that place is the work and the record of Frantz Fanon. Now, Frantz Fanon is one of our Caribbean greats. He was born in the French Caribbean and worked extensively in the revolution in Algeria, among other places, but really a liberation thinker. So allow me, if I may, to quote a little of Fanon's work that really will set the context for the colonial space in which much of what the spiritual Baptist faith endured occurred. The colonial world is divided into compartments. It is probably unnecessary to recall the existence of native quarters and European quarters, of schools for natives and schools for Europeans. In the same way, we need not recall apartheid in South Africa. Yet, if we examine closely this system of compartments, we will at least be able to reveal the lines of force that it implies. This approach to the colonial world, its ordering and its geographical layout, will allow us to mark out the lines on which a decolonized society will be organized. The colonial world is cut in two. The dividing line, the frontiers, are shown by barracks and police stations. In the colonies, it is the policeman and the soldier who are the official instituted go-betweens. the spokesman of the settler and his rule of oppression. Might I, based on the scene that we saw a while ago, add the magistrate? In the colonial countries, the policeman and the soldier and the magistrate, by their immediate presence and their frequent and direct action, maintain contact with the native and advise him by means of rifle butts not to budge. We must know our place. It is obvious here that the agents of government speak the language of pure force. The intermediary does not lighten the oppression nor seek to hide the domination. He shows them up and puts them into practice with the clear conscience of an upholder of the peace. I will return to the word upholder. Yet he is the bringer of violence into the home and into the mind of the native. This captures the colonial context in which our forefathers lived and functioned, and in which they sought to bring themselves to a life in eternity with God through the religion. In a psychiatric and psychological sense, a pure psychoanalytic Freudian framework, repression is the action or process of suppressing a thought or desire into oneself so that it remains unconscious. Think of yourself, think of ourselves as being repressed and subjected into the mind so that people are unconscious of our existence. Repression sought to do that. We must not be seen. We must not be in their consciousness. We must not be in their presence. We must be repressed. Religious repression is a systemic mistreatment of an individual or group of individuals as a response to their religious beliefs or affiliations or lack thereof. Because truth be told, in some countries, in some societies, atheists are also the victims of religious repression for their lack of belief. The tendency of societies and groups to alienate or to repress different subcultures is a recurrent theme. This thing spreads across every continent, in every society, that at some point some religions have been repressed. But come back to our colonial context. And that context is partly defined by the colonizer and enforced by the colonizer. Let's recognize and remember that religion was a primary vehicle and instrument of colonization. So that is their tool. It was their tool. And the colonizers and the agents sought to control belief systems. And here are these people taking this thing and making it their own. How dare you? How dare you? This is our instrument, our tool, and you are doing something that we don't know about and that we don't understand and we don't control. In this colonial context, there are some identity issues. There is no self without other. So when we begin to think about identity, we think about identity of self, but we also recognize identity of other. And in identity, as we look at self and we look at other, some things begin to emerge out of this colonial society. There are issues of power and privilege because some people have and some people don't. There's entitlement. There's exclusion. I remember as a youngster growing up in Arima, going to just the fence of the Arima Tennis Club and pulling the hedge aside and looking inside at what we as little boys used to call white people carnival. I could not go into the Arima Tennis Club in the 1950s. They came with their costumes, they had their tennis court, and we were outside peeping through the fence. White people carnival. Let's understand the fence. In the oil sector, the energy sector as we call it now, We know the issues of junior staff, senior staff, who on camp, who not on camp, who could go in the club, who can't go in the club, who in the barracks, and who in the bungalows. We know that. That is the colonial experience. So this thing about who has and who does not have was a very stark reality. Children playing. There were friends who had a bat and a ball, and other friends who didn't have a bat and a ball. So the business of having and not having is a key characteristic of any society. But in a lot of ways, who had and who did not have in our context really had to do a lot with race and ethnicity. Who are the players in this scenario? Well, there was the purveyor of the repression. Someone with a sense of self, a sense of power, a sense of authority, but also characterized by a certain element of fear, ignorance, and arrogance. Why suppress something of which you are not afraid? Doesn't make sense. What is this thing? I don't understand it. I am going to have to root it out. I'm going to have to repress it. So understand that while it came across as arrogance and power, deep in their identity was a sense of fear and insecurity. Amen. Rooted in this fear and ignorance, what does the colonizer become? Well, when you're afraid and you're ignorant, there's a lot of irrationality that takes place. And therefore, how does the question comes up, how does that colonizer experience himself? What is his identity? A sense maybe of losing control, a sense that this religion that I'm seeing here, this thing that these people are doing, I don't know about it, it's not mine, and it's something that we have to suppress, repress into some kind of unconsciousness. So that's the purveyor of the repression. What about the target of the repression? Why were we experiencing this sense of being different? The people who experienced and who were targeted with that repression were feared and sometimes were excluded. We have to ask ourselves, as that was happening, what is this person's sense of consciousness about what was happening to them, and therefore what was their commitment to the thing that was the reason for their repression? What might the target of this repression compromise? If I am going to be compromised, if I ran the risk of being put in jail, if I ran the risk of having to go to court, if I ran the risk of losing my home and being abused, what might I compromise my faith? Might I compromise my statement of my faith? Might I compromise my declaration of this faith? So the person who is targeted runs a risk as well, and may very well have had to live a life of duality. Baptist in the bush, but something else on the road. Baptist by night, but something else by day. That became and could very well have become part of the duality of the identity that Baptists experienced. But let's get back to the upholder. So there's the person who is purveying this repression, there's the target and the victim of the repression, but there is the upholder of the repression. But the upholder looks like us. Is not anybody different? So this visible identity, similar, looking like us, Butu, police van, jail. What is this? How do we make sense of that in our minds? What happens to them as they uphold something that is different and persecute somebody who looks like us? And as we said, it is not just about Baptists, because the same thing happened with the Steel Band movement. It was the same police who were running down and holding people who were beating pan and making noise. They had a problem with noise. If you sing too loud, if you beat too loud, if you play too loud, noise, something is wrong with that. And maybe it is that people like that become victims to what we call, the Stockholm syndrome, the identification with the aggressor. I identify with the colonizer, I become like the colonizer, so I'm no longer in danger. Someone else is. But we know that the upholder is worse than the thief. And many of the upholders became worse than the actual colonial, masters. There is the person who presents the repression, the person who receives the repression, the person who executes the repression. But that's not all. There were the observers of the repression. Because there were people who were neither colonial, nor police, nor Baptists, but they were living right here. And so we have to ask ourselves, what about them? What did they experience as this was going on? What was some of the guilt that they might have experienced? Guilt by omission or guilt by commission? Maybe they encouraged it. Maybe they just said nothing. Maybe there was collusion. Collusion by action, but collusion in the repression by silence. Not speaking, not standing up, and maybe it was collusion by storytelling. We understand the power of stories. Hey, you hear what happened yesterday? Yes, they went and the stories start to be told. The stories that are told out of a place of ignorance, out of a place of not knowing, out of a place of not understanding, out of the place of some deep fear of something that doesn't look like me and doesn't speak the way I speak. And those stories and that mythology continue to be told. But what are the responses to repression? Well, interestingly, there's a quotation from a Pentecostal pastor in Kyrgyzstan in 2004. And he said, just a short piece of what he said, our faith thrives when it is being repressed. What happens when faith is repressed? People become resolute. People may become bold. Now, those on the edges may fall off. But at the center, it holds. It gets stronger. It becomes firmer. There's something to stand up for. There's collaboration. There's coming together. There's togetherness. There's that bonding in the face of repression. Because coming together is a form of survival. So we do that, and one response to repression is that the people who we celebrate today as the people who went before and kept the faith going, they stood together. They became more committed. That's why they were there, and that is why we are here with the faith that we have today. In this kind of space, there's an issue of duality of identity. Who am I? And when? And where? So do I wear my head tie when I'm going to work? Oh, well, when I'm going to work, I'm not a Baptist. I'm a worker. But in another circumstance, I put on my head tie. So when I am doing my work, do I say to people that I'm a Baptist? Well, yes, if it comes up, I do. And I remember one person, that a client I was working with, said, oh, Watkins having a session? I ain't coming to that now. He's a Baptist. Yes. In the year 2000, in Trinidad and Tobago, Watkins is a Baptist, and he running the session. So they ain't coming to the session. This thing runs deep.
Amen.
So there's this public identity, and very often a secret identity. What is the mix in our identity of pride in who and what we are as a faith, but shame about being that in certain spaces and in public? How do we as individuals, how do we as a faith carry that kind of duality, these conflicting feelings within us, these conflicting characteristics and traits within us about who we are as Baptists? Let me return to Fanon. And he says in terms of repression and anger, it is the anger of all whose cultures, knowledge systems, and ways of being that are ridiculed, demonized, declared inferior and irrational, and in some cases eliminated. He says there's an anger that we experience on the basis of what is being done to us or what has been done. But he says it is not just any anger. It is the universal fury against oppression in general and the perpetual domination of the Western civilization in particular. The anger is not a spontaneous phenomenon. It is no gut reaction or some recently discovered passion for justice and equity. So sometimes what we feel, the resentment, the anger that we feel, is much more than just agevex. It's not that. He says it is an anger born out of grinding experience, painfully long self-analysis, and even longer thought and reflection. We have labored, we have reflected, we have prayed, we have gone to the ground, we have thought about this thing long and painfully, so that what we feel is not agevex. It is deeper and more meaningful than that. He says as such, it is a guarded anger, directed at a specific long-term desire. The desire that's grounded in self-consciousness, but when it encounters resistance from the other, self-consciousness undergoes the experience of desire, the first milestone on the road to dignity. When you reflect, when you think about things, when you go through that grinding experience, and you are conscious of who and what you are and a desire to be, when that is resisted, we not just get in vex. We stand with dignity and say, we are people, and we believe in something. We know where we have come from, and we are prepared to stand for that. It says in this context, it becomes natural for the colonizer to deploy violence because that's the only thing that the colonizer knows. It says for the colonial subject, freeing us, freeing ourselves through violence can be a cathartic experience. Fanon states that as oppressed people, sometimes we have to be violent. And that violence cleanses us and heals us. But I have a question for spiritual Baptists and our identity as Christians. Because how does this thing about cathartic violence square with the rationale for the repression, our Christian belief system? We can't just get vexed and go and start beating up people too. But we hurt, and we angry, and we have something that we want to get rid of. But our Christian spirit says to us, that is not us. That is not what we're supposed to do. How do we manage that? And that conflict becomes part of who and what we are. I repeat, it is a guarded anger directed at a specific long-term desire. The desire is grounded in self-consciousness, and when it encounters resistance from the other, self-consciousness undergoes the experience of desire. The first milestone on the road that leads to dignity. When we are resisted, when we fight for that removal of prohibition, when we stand up for it, when we proclaim who and what we are, those are milestones on the road to dignity. That's who and what we are as spiritual Baptists. Now, Fanon does speak at some time about that desire to get rid of this thing. And he says it's not necessary though. All of us weren't there during Prohibition, you know. It's not necessary to be wounded by a bullet to suffer from the fact of war. We don't have to be physically wounded, but we suffer. We understand the story. We have heard the stories that were told. We can connect with it. We feel it even today. I'm not going to that workshop because Watkins is a Baptist. We feel it still. Even though we weren't in the trenches and in the war. Now this violence, this need to do that, really in a lot of ways can cleanse some of our woundedness. Well, let's think of our wounds from a Christian perspective. Wounds are the doorway to redemption. Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was wounded. His hands, his feet, his crown of thorns, a spear in his side. Those wounds are the doorway to our redemption. The wounds that we have felt as a faith are the wounds, those wounds are the doorway to our redemption as a people and as a faith. So rather than striking back, what do we do? How do we manage this thing? We take this woundedness and we say, you know what? How do I live? How do I live with dignity? How do I walk with dignity and with a sense of being hurt and humbled, but confident and hope-filled? Being beaten, yet being bold. Being repressed, being reflective, and becoming resolute. Experiencing not just the survival, but the success of our spiritual Baptist journey. By being prayerful, by being thoughtful, and being thankful for the journey that we have been on, secure in the knowledge that it's God's will for us. There's much that we can learn from it, and we move forward, grappling with our issues of identity, but secure in the knowledge that the identity we do have as spiritual Baptists on that journey and our way to a life in eternity with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning to everyone, and I wish to thank those who are responsible, Dr. DePisa, and all those who are responsible for inviting me to be part of this important occasion. And good morning to all the mothers who are here, the spiritual elders, and the very distinguished panel that I am a part of. I think what was said by Mr. Watkins, I always say Dr. Watkins, I don't know if I'm wrong, was very, very important. And I should say, let me start on a note of victory as I'm on the campus, because there has been a bit of a controversial issue on the campus here. There's a hall by the name of Milner Hall, and that Milner is Lord Albert Milner, who was one of the people who was responsible for oppression as African people. And in South Africa, he was a racist. He helped found the foundation of apartheid, very cruel to African people. And plus he had a philosophy of outright racism and looking to make the white race superior. In fact, the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture here was founded. He was important in the founding of that. And it was part of a global mission so that whites who were meant to take over the continent of Africa, and agriculture was the important thing at the time, would come here to learn tropical agriculture. It wasn't set up for us. It was set up as a station for them to learn the tropical agriculture. Now, there are people who feel that it is not good in any sense for a hall of residence at the University of the West Indies to be named after a brutal colonizer. And my brother just spoke a lot about colonization and its evils and its brutalization of our people. But it became a controversial issue here on campus. But I was very pleased to learn last night that at a meeting of the Pro-Vice Chancellor and other top people of the regional university, a decision was taken that the name of Milner Hall will be changed. So we begin on. So that the Baptists are moving, have had some victories, and have other hills to climb, and more victories to achieve. And we have had a little victory here for all of us as African people and all of us as Caribbean people, since this is the University of the West Indies. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I think about 2 weeks ago, I had a beautiful experience. I was invited to a celebratory service in Guayari by Bishop Besso. And one of the things that pleased me was the attendance at the service, in the sense that you had, and let me try, a Catholic priest came and gave his message, a Presbyterian priest, an Anglican. You also had, among the Baptists, you had a Baptist elder from Barbados who came over for that celebration. You also had the representative of the Orisha faith there who spoke, and you also had representative of the Muslim faith there who spoke. And well, that was a different kind of Muslim. That was Brother David Muhammad who spoke. So you had Islam represented as well at that session. Apart from that, at the end of the service, when people were being called upon to identify themselves, it's then I realized that I was not there with one single Baptist congregation. It is not only the people who belong to Bishop Besso's church. You had people from a number of other Baptist communities who were present there and identified themselves. They had come in buses and whatnot to be part of that occasion. So what we had was really ecumenism, and also, very important, a show of unity among our Baptist brothers and sisters. And I think that is something that is very important. And now I'm not going to fool myself that either the ecumenism or the show of Baptist unity there is a total reflection of how we live in this society. It isn't. But what it is a signal that that is possible. And that is what we ought to aim for. There's no reason why we African people should be as divided as we are, either on the basis of religious faith, or if people are Christian, what denomination they belong to, and all of that. We need to see the larger picture. Because if we look at the reason for the prohibition, it wasn't a prohibition because Baptists are Christian. When we were brought here, when our foreparents were brought here, we were not, they didn't see us as people they wanted to Christianize in order to make us better people. That was not the purpose. And they were not against us being Christian. They tried to turn us into Christians. But into Christians, in their image and likeness, not in the image and likeness of any God that's worthy of worship. That is not what they wanted. In fact, when you go back in the history, you find that when the Catholics were bringing our people here, you had at the slave ports, where the ships were leaving Africa with cargoes of human beings in the hold. And according to the British Privy Council, the conditions on shipboard were such that I think it was approximately 1/3 of the people who were put on those ships did not even live to reach the Caribbean and the Americas because of those conditions. So that many of our foreparents became shark food on the way over to the Caribbean. But when the ships were leaving with us in that hold, which became a hellhole over that voyage, you had the Catholic priests on high stand they built, sprinkling the holy water and supposedly baptizing our people into Christianity at that time. And when they brought us here on the plantations, they wanted us all to be Christian. But the message that they preached to us as Christians was a message that our enslavement was God ordained. Because we had been cursed being the sons of Ham, and therefore, in order to gain our redemption, we had to work for the white master. No matter what we suffered, that suffering was part of our redemption. So if a man was free to rape my wife, that was part of my redemption. And if I had to work from morning to night for no pay, that was my redemption. And if I rebelled, and as a result of the rebellion, they would burn me slowly from the feet up and force my family and everybody else to watch so nobody else would want to rebel. That was part of my redemption. So that Christianity was meant to be Christianity to enslave us. The Baptists, in fact, and this is why we have to know our history, by being what you are and by the way in which you expressed your Christianity, you were turning the tables on what Christianity was meant to be for us. Because when they had a prohibition, it wasn't a prohibition against the fact that you worship Jesus Christ. It was a prohibition of the way in which you worshipped, because the way in which you worshipped was telling them, I still have my African roots. I am doing things in a way that my African self, those cultural instincts that I came with, you fail to beat them out of me, and they are being expressed when I ring my bell, and when I stamp my feet, and when I shout the way I shout, and when I sing in the tones I sing in, and my rhythms, and I use the drum. It is my African self that is being expressed. So even though I might have lost the knowledge of Africa, I might have lost a lot of knowledge about who I am, but inside of me there was still something that was me, and that is what was expressing myself in the way in which I worshipped. And that is what they aim to get at with the prohibition. And you see, that is a link between the Baptists and the Orisha. Because the Orisha are also people who worship in an African way. And if you saw, certainly in the earlier days, I think there's some movement away from it now, you would find that the Orisha, because you had to adapt, you were not allowed to worship in your way. I don't know if any of you saw that movie, what is called Birth of a Nation. Any of you saw Birth of a Nation? The thing about Nat Turner? It is a movie that unfortunately got torn apart by critics. And a lot of our people who need to see that movie, we need to see that movie, did not go to see the movie. Because they always find a way to cut down something that they feel is powerful. And the producer of the movie, an African American, and when the movie came out in those film festivals, it won all kinds of awards. It was such a great movie, won a lot of awards. But they realized the impact it would have on the minds of our people. And therefore, because it was dealing with a real figure, Nat Turner, who led a rebellion, and he was a Baptist preacher in the United States, and he led a rebellion in the United States. And here was a movie which was capturing some of the essences of who Nat Turner was and what he did. And it was also showing the cruelty and viciousness of the plantation system. And they did not want our people to look at either that viciousness or the rebellion against it. And what they did, they said this guy had a charge for rape when he was a student many, many years ago. Now he won his case, but they brought that up in order to mobilize against him, a case that he had won in the courts in the United States. And so they couldn't attack the movie directly, they attacked him. And we have seen all the Weinsteins and all of them producers and what they've been involved in, you know. But we, unfortunately, our people fell for it as well. But if you have an opportunity, please see that movie, because it shows how, you see, Nat was a preacher. He was a preacher. And he got visions. And it is through those visions that he took the decision to go and lead the rebellion that he led in the United States. Now, to talk about the social side of this situation, in the 70s, the early 80s, I lived in a place in Carenage, small community in Carenage, very close-knit. My immediate neighbor was a Baptist. Her name was Sister Amy. And we were very close, not just as neighbors next door to each other, but in our relationship, we were very close. And one of the disturbing things in the environment is that a lot of people in the neighborhood did not like Sister Amy. And I asked myself why they did not like Sister Amy. I thought she was a wonderful person in character. She was a great friend to me and my family. And when you look at it, you see she was a very strong Baptist. So she would ring her bell in her house when she prayed, and she would light up candles and all of that. And even we see ourselves in terms of denominations before we see ourselves as a people with a common experience. So Sister Amy did not fit the bill. And therefore people found, they never said that, they always found all kinds of excuses. One of which is they say she's an Obia woman. But I ate perhaps more of Sister Amy food than my wife, what my wife cooked. And I never tasted